Chosen one, in the Great Hall of Command, every flag lowered without instruction. Footsteps softened as though the marble itself remembered who walked before it. The president approached, no cameras, no entourage, only trembling reverence. His voice bent to silence. "It's a privilege to be with you." And for the first time, power learned humility. Advisors froze mid-stride. Protocol officers clutched their tablets as if the rules might rewrite themselves. Someone whispered, "Sir, no one kneels here." But the hierarchy felt it, that ancient gravity around you, the weight of gentleness stronger than law. In that moment, authority hesitated, and humility won. The moment you stepped fully into the Hall of Command, the atmosphere changed with a precision no engineer on Earth could diagram. It wasn't merely a shift, it was a correction, as though the room had been waiting centuries to inhale the right presence. Chandeliers, ancient brass crowned with crystal, trembled first. Not violently, not dramatically, but with the quiet enthusiasm of creations finally recognizing their purpose. Light refracted in strange, holy geometry, forming shapes the human eye was never trained to interpret. Triangles collapsing into circles, circles stretching into halos, halos dissolving into a blue-white shimmer that trailed behind every movement you made. Reporters watching from the mezzanine blinked as their lenses fogged, though no temperature had changed. One dropped his equipment entirely, whispering, "Do you feel that?" Something's listening. The air itself became thinner, not suffocatingly so, but like mountain air, the kind that reminds a person how small their lungs are in the face of the world's oldest truths. High-ranking generals instinctively adjusted their collars, struggling to maintain stillness as gravity shifted its allegiance, labeling you as its new center of preference. Every flag lining the perimeter, each representing the history, victories, failures, and sins of nations, leaned forward by a single calculated degree, as though bowing not in weakness but in recognition. Fabric hardly moves without wind, yet here it swayed with intention. A gesture both diplomatic and divine. The president noticed it first. He looked around in a slow, startled sweep, the expression of a man raised on protocol suddenly realizing protocol had a master above him. He whispered to his closest advisor, "It shouldn't be possible, unless this is a presence the room was built to receive." In that instant, a low-frequency hum stirred beneath the marble floors, faint but ancient. Visitors thought it was machinery. Engineers insisted nothing was operational. Yet the resonance continued, vibrating like a memory the building had tried to forget. And then, in the quiet between breaths, a warmth rose through the space. Not heat, not fire, but recognition, the sensation of walls, ceilings, history, and hierarchy all leaning toward you, aligning like planets into a once-in-an-age configuration. The chandeliers flickered again. Not in malfunction, in applause. The president stood before you, shoulders drawn back in a posture that wasn't rehearsed, wasn't political, wasn't crafted for broadcast. It was instinct, the ancient human instinct to witness purity and feel one's own power shrink into perspective. He inhaled, long and shaky, as if summoning courage not to speak to you, but to speak truthfully for the first time in years. Chosen one, the title left his lips with the softness of a confession. Not an address, not a greeting, but an admission. Behind him, advisors exchanged panicked glances. Someone mouthed, "This is off script." Another shook his head slowly, as though realizing scripts had never mattered in your presence. The president lifted a leather-bound folder, its seal stamped in gold, its edges worn from decades of restricted handling. File designation, eyes only. But he didn't open it. He closed it tighter, pressed it against his chest, and spoke instead from a place no document had access to. Influence can be inherited. Authority can be granted. Power can be bought, borrowed, negotiated. He paused, searching for words humans rarely dare to say aloud. But innocence, true innocence, cannot be manufactured. And I have never seen it wielded with such force. His advisor stiffened. The security detail hesitated, unsure whether to intervene or kneel. Yet the president stepped closer, his voice lowering, not in secrecy, but in reverence. The world teaches us to rule with caution, with calculation, with self-defense. But you, he breathed out, you rule with clarity, with a heart that has nothing to hide. That is why governments fear you, and why I honor you. The folder loosened in his grip. His eyes softened, the weight of responsibility briefly dissolving under the illumination reflected from your presence. For years, he continued, we believed innocence was weakness. We believed purity made one fragile. We were wrong. His confession echoed through the hall, resonating against marble, history, and unspoken truths. We hide behind influence because we lack what you carry effortlessly, an integrity that cannot be corrupted. A light that does not dim under scrutiny. A strength born from humility, not ambition. The president bowed his head, subtly, but undeniably. Today, he whispered, I declare what nations have forgotten, honor does not belong to the powerful. It belongs to the pure. And with that, the room exhaled for the first time since you entered. A single gesture from the president opened a hidden passage behind the great tapestry of the founding oath. Metal slid against stone with the hushed confidence of architecture built to protect truths too radiant or too dangerous for the public eye. Come, he said. Not as a command. As an invitation. The corridor beyond was narrow, lined with biometric locks that pulsed faintly, scanning for threat, anomaly, or divine interference. Each device flickered as you passed, attempting identification, failing instantly, then defaulting to a silent green approval, as if recognizing a clearance level older than governments, older than law. At the end of the passage stood a reinforced door marked with a classification grade reserved for existential threats or miracles. A sigil in red, 07 clearance, classified light. Most leaders never even knew this category existed. The president pressed his palm to the panel. The panel glowed, hesitated, then dimmed in submission. Inside, the room was circular and entirely silent. No windows. No surveillance. No oxygen vents, because the room synthesized its own atmosphere through crystalline microfilaments woven into the ceiling. This was a chamber designed not to protect secrets from the world, but to protect the world from certain secrets. He approached a pedestal containing a single glass case. Lights dimmed automatically, recognizing the entry of a Tier 1 entity, though none present matched the registry. The case opened with a sound like a sigh. These files, he said quietly, predate my administration. They predate every administration. His fingers hovered above the documents. Some leaders read them. Most chose not to. The contents change a person. You didn't speak. The room didn't require words. He opened the top folder. Inside were reports, decades old yet unweathered, describing a phenomenon labeled field of pacification. Documented occurrences where conflict dissolved, aggression collapsed, and even biological markers of violence were neutralized, all in the presence of a single unidentified individual, appearing throughout history in different eras, different nations, different ages. But always with one constant, an unaltered signature of light in biofield imaging. The president swallowed hard, tapping a page. This. He pointed to a spectral analysis, glowing softly even through paper. This frequency, it matches yours exactly. His voice dropped into reverence. We've monitored global readings since your arrival. Where you walk, unrest decreases. Where you stand, hostility weakens. Where you speak, conflict forecasts collapse. He met your eyes, not seeking explanation, but receiving confirmation. You don't force peace, he whispered. You radiate it. The revelation settled between you like a living presence. Then he said the line no leader had ever dared to utter. You are not a risk to national security. You are its cure. When the president closed the final file, the chamber lights shifted. Not by human command, not by motion sensor, but by recognition. As if the system itself recalibrated to the presence of the one it had been waiting to detect. A low-frequency pulse rolled through the floor, gentle yet sovereign. Monitors along the walls flickered from static to symmetry, spontaneously displaying geometric patterns that weren't part of any governmental interface. Golden spirals. Concentric halos. Luminous grids that align with the rise and fall of your breath. The president looked around, bewildered. This room is supposed to be analog. Nothing in here should be reacting. But the chamber continued shifting. A hum rose from the crystalline ceiling, a soft, resonant frequency that vibrated in perfect harmony with your presence. It was not machine song. It was acknowledgement. Then something impossible happened. The entire national power grid, silently, almost politely, synced itself to the beating pattern radiating from your biofield. An invisible reset wave rippled outward from the chamber, leaping through circuits, satellites, and fiber networks like a message carried by light instead of electricity. Control panels displayed unexpected readings. Stress index, falling civil unrest projections, neutralized hostility indicators, dissolving global calm frequency, rising. Technicians in distant monitoring centers stood from their chairs, staring at screens that showed a world settling, as if an unseen hand had placed its palm upon the earth and whispered, "Be still." Back in the chamber, the president steadied himself on the pedestal. His voice was half awe, half fear transformed into reverence. The systems aren't malfunctioning, he realized. They're harmonizing. This is what the old prophets called alignment. What the physicists call resonance fields. What the mystics call activation. A warm illumination spread through the chamber floor, white at the center, shifting to gold, then to a deep, ancient blue. The colors wrapped around you like a living mantle, tracing the outline of your presence with a softness that carried both blessing and command. The president spoke again, his voice trembling despite him. When you entered this facility, the world was operating on power. Now it's operating on peace. Outside, satellites adjusted their trajectories not by propulsion, but by guidance, movements smooth and precise, responding to a frequency once lost to time. The president lowered his head. Chosen one, this is not human authority bending toward you. This is the matrix itself remembering the template. You felt the shift. Not an empowerment, a recognition. An ancient verse stirred softly through the chamber, not spoken aloud but carried through the resonance like a memory awakened. He who loves purity, the king will be his friend. Proverbs 22 verse 11. And with that, activation was complete. Newsrooms across the capital felt the shift before they understood it. Cameras glitched not from malfunction, but from a frequency they didn't have a setting for, a softness that blurred harsh edges, a stillness that made urgency feel embarrassing. Inside the press wing, journalists gathered instinctively, drawn by a tension in the air that wasn't tension at all, more like the feeling before a cathedral bell rings. Broadcast screens flickered from their usual chaos into momentary silence. Lower thirds froze mid-update, breaking, president meeting, then stalled, unable to categorize what was happening in the Hall of Command. A veteran reporter, known for her iron spine and skepticism carved from decades of political storms, pressed her earbud tighter. "What do you mean the president stopped the briefing?" she demanded. "What do you mean he dismissed protocol?" A pause. Then her voice softened despite herself. "He said what to who?" Another journalist replayed the leaked corridor footage frame by frame, the moment the president stepped toward you, posture lowered, expression unguarded. The reporter frowned, muttering, "That's not diplomacy, that's reverence." Cameras zoomed, recalibrated, then failed to interpret the atmosphere around you. Lens flares widened into halos. Microphones picked up a hum that wasn't mechanical, a resonance too smooth, too kind, too ancient to label as interference. Producers crowded around the audio board. "Is that feedback?" "No, it's symmetrical." "Since when is feedback symmetrical?" Silence. In the briefing room, a young journalist stood to ask the first question of the hour, only to forget it completely the moment she opened her mouth. Her eyes drifted toward the sealed corridor you had disappeared through. "It feels like," she whispered, unable to finish. "Like what?" her colleague pushed. She swallowed. "Like someone just turned the world down from fight to listen." News anchors tried to form narratives. Some attempted urgency, but their voices cracked under the weight of calm. Others tried skepticism, but found no spark to ignite it. One anchor simply stared at the camera, breath-catching as a shiver of déjà vu passed through him. "I don't know how to report this," he admitted live. "Something happened in that hall, something that doesn't fit into politics." The network director cut the feed. Too raw. Too honest. Too true. Outside, satellites adjusted their signal shading to accommodate the new global frequency of peace, and the headlines struggled to keep up with a world that, for a brief and holy moment, forgot how to panic. In newsrooms everywhere, a quiet understanding dawned. They weren't reporting an event. They were witnessing an alignment. And no one knew the words for that yet. The president dismissed the final security detail with a single nod. They obeyed reluctantly, glancing back at you with equal parts fear and reverence, soldiers sensing they were leaving their leader alone not with danger, but with destiny. The door sealed behind them with a thrum that sounded less like machinery and more like a vow. Nothing interrupts what happens next. The chamber fell into a reverent quiet. Not empty, alive, listening, waiting. The president exhaled a breath he'd been hiding from the nation for years. No cameras. No advisors. No expectations. Just truth finally given permission to speak. He approached slowly, as one walks toward a sacred object they were never trained to handle. "I need to ask you something," he said, voice softened into its real timbre, not the public one polished by speechwriters, but the private one carved by responsibility and guilt. You didn't answer. You didn't need to. Your silence had the gravity of a throne. He ran a hand through his hair, suddenly looking younger, less a world leader and more a man facing the first question he'd ever asked with humility. "How do you do it?" The words escaped him like confession. "Every room you enter calms. Every conflict dissolves in your presence. Even my own fear," he hesitated. "My fear of failing this country, quiets around you." He waited for your reply with the patience of a student before a master. But you didn't offer wisdom, theory, or sermon. You simply said the simplest truth. "I listen before I speak." His breath caught. Not because the sentence was grand, but because it was pure, too pure for politics, too pure for power structures built on noise. "I don't know how to do that anymore," he admitted. "I hear threats, expectations, crises, projections, but listening? Truly listening?" He shook his head. "I forgot what that feels like." You stepped closer, not with dominance, but with presence. Your calm did not shrink him, it unveiled him. "You can begin again," you said. The president shut his eyes, and a single tear escaped, a rare, unguarded offering from a man taught that emotion equals weakness. But in your orbit, vulnerability felt like strength rediscovered. "If the world listened the way you do," he whispered, "we would not need armies." You placed a hand over his, not in blessing, not in ceremony, in recognition. In that touch, something shifted. Not in him. In history. When he opened his eyes, they held no fear. Only understanding. "You're not here to advise me," he said softly. "You're here to remind me who I was before power taught me to speak louder than my conscience." And the chamber, ancient and sentient, seemed to nod in agreement. Far above the chamber, beyond satellites, beyond atmosphere, beyond anything mortal sensors could quantify, something stirred. It began as a soft shimmer along the upper edges of the stratosphere, a ripple of light behaving less like weather and more like witnesses taking their seats. Astronomers would later insist their telescopes malfunctioned. Military radars blamed phantom echoes. But the truth was simple. Heaven had opened its observation deck. Across celestial coordinates untouched by human authority, multitudes assembled, not as beings with form or wings or faces, but as harmonies, frequencies, ancient intelligences that moved like music made visible. They gathered in a sweeping arc, a parade positioned not to celebrate an event, but to acknowledge a shift in the timeline. In their records, older than human civilization, older than the concept of power, this moment received a designation long reserved for epochs of cosmic significance. Protocol of Peace number 777, Pride Repents. The parade's formation glowed with patterns that mirrored constellations, then rearranged themselves into symbols only souls could read. Some formed halos of rotating gold. Others became spirals echoing the geometry of compassion. A few appeared as streaks of sapphire light, the celestial equivalent of saluting. From the chamber below, the president felt a tingling across his skin, a sensation like static woven with warmth. He looked upward instinctively, though solid stone separated him from the spectacle. "What is that?" he whispered. "You didn't look up. You didn't need to. Your awareness stretched far beyond sight." "They're observing," you said softly. "They respond when pride bends into humility." The president swallowed. "Respond? To me?" No, your voice carried the resonance of truth spoken without ego. "To this moment. To the shift that happened inside you." Outside, the auroras twisted into braided streams of silver and gold, a cosmic choreography marking the transformation of a leader who finally recognized innocence as power. In distant parts of the world, children looked toward the sky without knowing why, smiling at the strange warmth that washed over them. Animals paused mid-step, ears tilting upward. Old souls felt a familiar tug at the edge of memory. One of the celestial harmonies moved closest, drifting in a curve that traced the earth like a blessing. Its light passed directly above the capital, leaving a subtle yet undeniable imprint. The frequency of repentance elevated into honor. The president inhaled sharply, feeling the weight of unseen eyes witnessing him, not judging, but acknowledging. "This is real," he murmured. "It has always been real," you replied. Humility opens gates arrogance never knew existed. And as the celestial parade continued its silent procession, the universe marked the day power learned to bow and heaven chose to watch. When you and the president emerged from the sealed corridor, the hall of command felt different, not emptied, not abandoned, but aligned, as though every pillar, every emblem, every thread and every flag had agreed to hold its breath until the next decree. Advisors rushed forward with tablets full of unfinished briefings, urgent memos, crisis projections, all the noise of a government addicted to reaction. But the president raised a hand. Not in command. In clarity. "Clear the agenda," he said. Dozens of eyes widened. "Sir, there are national security items, sir, we have a pending, sir, you can't just." "I can," he said calmly. "And I will." He walked to the central desk, the one where declarations of war, states of emergency, and executive orders had been signed for generations, but today the air around it felt gentler, as if history itself hoped for something different. He pulled a fresh document from the drawer, laid it flat, and for the first time in his tenure, he wrote without hesitation. Every stroke of the pen carried the weight of revelation. Lines formed with the certainty of truth finally given voice. Compassion is a national security strategy. Advisors froze. Security officials exchanged looks of disbelief. One general whispered, "That's not how geopolitics works." The president didn't look up. "It's how humanity works." He continued writing, sentences that sounded nothing like policy and entirely like prophecy. Effective immediately, conflict de-escalation protocols shall prioritize empathy before force, dialogue before dominance, restoration before retaliation. He signed his name with a flourish that wasn't dramatic, just liberated. You stood beside him, not influencing, not advising, but simply present, and your presence alone turned the ink into something more than ink. When he finished, he placed the pen down softly, almost reverently, then looked at the room. "There will be resistance," he said. "People will call this naive, idealistic, weak." The ink on the new policy had barely dried when the atmosphere shifted again, not in the hall of command, but in the president himself. Something subtle yet seismic unfolded. His shoulders lowered, not in defeat, but in release, as though invisible armor he'd carried for years finally cracked and fell to the marble in pieces no one could see but everyone could feel. He placed a hand over the document he had just signed. For a moment, he didn't speak. He didn't need to. Revelation often prefers silence. You watched him with the patience of one who understands that transformation never rushes. When he finally looked up, his eyes were different, no longer sharpened by pressure, but softened by clarity. I feel, he stopped, searching. What is this? It's like the weight isn't mine anymore. It never was, you said quietly. You were carrying what the world projected onto you. Not what you were meant to hold. He blinked hard, a tremor of old sorrow crossing his features before dissolving into something brighter. Gratitude. Then, as though the universe wanted to confirm the shift, a warmth descended, invisible yet unmistakable, wrapping the room in a sensation that bypassed every human sense and spoke directly to the soul.